Welcome, everybody. Happy Hispanic Heritage
excited.
Month.
Hello.
Happy Hispanic Heritage Month. Happy Latinx Month. Happy BIPOC Month. All that. I'm Judith Perez, and we are here today to talk about the solidarity that is needed to get out the vote and to turn this election season around. I'm here with some special guests that are very close to me and to my heart. And I just want to note that this is the second to last show before the election. We are how many days out? Who can tell me?
I think it's 40.
40 days out to the election. And so we have some special guests tonight that are going to talk about the importance of Black and Latinx solidarity, of Asian and Latinx solidarity, of BIPOC solidarity. And if you don't know what that stands for, that's Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And we're also going to talk about importance of intra-ethnic solidarity and Puerto Rican solidarity tonight too. So to this side, I can't tell with this thing. This is my husband, Dr. Howard Caro-Lopez, and he is going to talk tonight about the importance of Puerto Rican and Latinx solidarity.
Good evening, everyone. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. And then we also have with us Zoė ColÓn, who's my moderator, my co-host, my partner in crime, my hermana, who's calling in from Orlando. And she's going to talk about all the important work that she's been doing to get out the vote.
Honored to be with you guys today. I can't wait. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. And then tuning in are my buddies in Washington, D.C. We have Jennė Lewis, who is now running for council member at large in Washington, D.C. Jennė, welcome.
Hi, everybody. Happy to be here.
Yes. And last but certainly not least is my partner in crime, my consulting partner, Ben Cheng, Esquire, who's going to talk about the importance of solidarity across communities. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Great. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to talk about the importance of community, the importance of storytelling, the importance of being a united front. And I want to start with you, Zoė, because this is something that you and I have been talking about for a number of years. We've known each other over 20 years. And unfortunately, we are still talking about the importance of building bridges, right? But the good thing about it is that we're here and we're seeing so many extraordinary changes in the last 20 years. Talk to us about why it's important to get out the vote, and especially now.
Oh, my goodness. So it's always been about our livelihood, right? About our voices being heard. So I don't think that needs to be said, but this election is literally it's a matter of life and death, the way I feel about it. We've seen how this administration has handled this pandemic that's led to hundreds of thousands of deaths that could have been prevented, arguably. We have seen how this administration treated Puerto Rico in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. So we're literally speaking about life and death. And so we need our communities to come together, put our differences aside, put aside the fact that you may not be entirely 100% behind this one candidate versus the other, and think about what's important for human rights, civil rights, and our democracy.
Yeah, thank you. And so when I think about it, Zoė, I think about both cross-racial solidarity, interracial solidarity, and then intra-racial solidarity, right? I think that's something that we take for granted, we might overlook, we don't talk about enough. And so I want to ask you, Howard, what is intra-racial solidarity, and why is it important for this conversation tonight and for the election season?
Well, if we're talking about intra-racial, meaning within the group, I think that gets to an important conversation that I think about, especially those of us who are trying to better understand how Latinos participate in the electoral process. I think it's partly getting to the point of understanding that we're not a monolithic group, right? And this is something that you often hear parroted and reiterated in sort of the mass media, so that there is this so-called Latino vote out there. And I think we need to take a step back and realize that that's not necessarily the case, right? We're looking at, when we look at our community, the Latino community or the Latino population in the United States, we're really talking about a varied experience across these people of different ancestries or different nationalities or national origins, right? And Florida is a particularly good example, and I know Zoė can certainly speak to this based on her experiences being down there, right? We oftentimes run into a situation, for example, where when the word Latino is thrown out, oftentimes the first group that a lot of people identify with is Mexican, right? And I'm sure this is true for a lot of you. It's certainly been true for me as a Latino to be identified or asked if I'm a Mexican, right? As someone who's living here as a Latino in the United States, as opposed to being what I am, which is Puerto Rican, right? And in Florida, we have a varied Cuban experience, the Puerto Rican experience, the Central American experience, so on and so forth. So when we talk about intra-group solidarity, the first point is to understand that there are these distinct experiences, and part of building coalitions is understanding that those differences exist even within our community, and then building upon where there are lines of commonality, identifying where are the common experiences, whether it's otherizing, whether it's speaking to experiences of discrimination, so on and so forth.
I'm Puerto Rican from the Bronx. I'm Boricua del Condado de la Salsa. And so coming to Orlando has been really eye-opening for me as far as my own Puerto Rican identity. So even within the Puerto Rican identity, right, there's all these different facets. And it's interesting because when I got to Orlando, you couldn't question my identity, right? But then as I started to do this work in this particular community where we have this huge mass exodus out of Puerto Rico into Central Florida, and particularly Kissimmee and Orlando, the experiences are so varied, like you said. We have, the politics in Puerto Rico are very different. The systems there are different. The parties are different. Ideologies are different. Our experiences in urban cores across the United States are very different. Our exposure to different communities, right? So as we think about coalition building, I grew up in a very Black and Latino neighborhood. Mm-hmm. So it was very natural for me to sit at the same table with the African-American community and others and build those bridges, right? Whereas in the South, it's just so different. And so just to make that point, that even within the Puerto Rican community, there are so many differences and so many varied experiences that when I came into Orlando, there was a learning curve for me.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So with that said, right, it's not only thinking about connecting with people across groups, but even within our own communities, right? Mm-hmm. And Jennė, can you speak about the importance of cross-racial solidarity, specifically within the Black and Latinx community, but just in your experience growing up in the Mid-Atlantic region, and then in your work now campaigning for office?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you talk about our friendship too.
I was about to say, and also being friends with you, right? And how we met. So, I live in DC. I'm running locally for DC Council, and growing up in this area, I didn't have actually a lot of exposure to Latinx people. I grew up in a really diverse suburb, but there weren't a lot of Latinx people in my suburb. Fast forward 20 years, went away to college, came back, and the population had grown drastically, right? And that's because of the migration and the demographic shifts in the country. But always in DC, even in the 80s, we had a huge Salvadoran population because of everything that was happening in Central America at the time. And so to your point, Howard, we didn't have a lot of Mexicans or Puerto Ricans in DC, but we had a lot of Salvadorans. And you can see that as the cultures developed throughout the city. But then there are other Latinx people from other countries or other communities that were almost invisibilized because, to your point, like people weren't used to having them around. So for me, solidarity is really important because the experiences of anti-Black racism, the experiences of African Americans in the country, those habits and those practices are being replicated on other marginalized communities. So when you look at what's happening in detention centers and how Latinas are being operated on against their will, and how it's a Black woman who recognized that as effectively like eugenics practices, because that's what happened to Black communities, then we see history repeating itself. And so we have a lot to understand from one another in terms of how anti-Black racism plays out, how that gets translated against immigrant communities from all over the world. And I think that the migration stories, particularly of Latinx people in the United States, are really important and resonate strongly with the migration stories of African Americans from the 20th century. And so when we can actually start to talk to each other about that, we can bond together to understand like how to overcome some of the oppression that we're jointly experiencing.
Yeah. I mean, many snaps, right? And in terms of the work that you and I do and what brought us together, we joined together because of a coalition building program for people who work on racial equity. Jennė created this program and I was invited to join. And that was 10 years ago. And so building those bonds and building those bridges is critical, right? We've been friends for over 10 years. And the bond that I think keeps us going is our genuine love and concern for one another and our communities, because we center what we do and how we do it on racial equity. So thank you for that. And Ben, you grew up in South Florida. You and I have talked about your journey. You've lived in a lot of different places, but you spent a big part of your formative years in high school in South Florida. Can you talk to us about the importance of Asian and Latinx solidarity and how it relates to what we need now more than ever before? And just before anyone, is curious, Ben is my consulting partner. We do diversity consulting work, but he also runs and created the first diversity and inclusion newsletter in the legal profession. So he's always doing research, always learning about all these different statistics that impact different communities across the board.
Thank you for that intro, Judy. Yeah, as you said, I grew up in South Florida. My high school, the Asian population was only about 3 to 5%, but the Latinx population is over 30%, wow. Right? And so what I started to feel and develop, in my formative years is as I was going to school with other Black students, with other Latinx students, I was seeing that, their parents, their families also had a very shared experience in mind. Their parents were also immigrants, or some of them, right? Came over, worked hard. They want a great, strong future for their students, right? They want them to go to college, to get good jobs, and they want a strong family unit, right? What I was also seeing too, to Howard's point, is the Asian community is also not monolithic either, right? A lot of people assume Asian, right? A lot of people think Chinese these days, but there's the East Asian population, there's the Southeast Asian, without even getting into the countries, there's the South Asian population, right? And so we have that commonality in terms of not being monolithic. But as me and Judy have talked about, another thing we have in common, I think, is the sense of always sort of being the perpetual foreigner, of always being sort of othered, right? I was just telling Judy yesterday, I was somewhere not too far from DC, you may guess, a little bit south, and someone asked me, do I speak English? And I was, unfortunately, it wasn't the first time that happened to me, but, but at least between the Asian Latinx communities, we're always assumed, that we just got here, right? And so, and that's shocking to me, because if you look at the numbers, right, in 2019, the Latinx Hispanic population makes up 18% of the U.S. population. The Asian population is 5.6%, right? Put together, we're close to 25% of the U.S. population. How did we just get here? That's kind of a crazy thought. And by 2030, we're going to get close to 30%, right? And especially among the Asian Latin groups, right? The Asian population and the Latinx population are the first and second fastest growing populations in the United States as well. So this isn't going anywhere, right? Maybe being asked if we speak English is not going to go anywhere either. But I think the numbers speak for themselves.
I think we also make a lot of assumptions about the Asian population. So I would say the vast majority of folks that really don't understand the diversity within the Asian population and about class and race within the population, we automatically kind of tokenize, you're the token minority, so right. You guys are the doctors and pharmacists, and so you guys are okay, and you don't you don't understand our struggle. And so there's a lot of that happening even within minority communities. And so there's absolutely a need for us to find intersections and talk about them and get to know, as we should with every community, obviously. But there's a lot of opportunity there as we continue to grow, and together, with three, plus the indigenous population, really become close to being the majority in this country. I think 2050 is what's projected, right?
That's right, 2050.
Together will actually become, I think, 50 something percent of the entire nation. So I think it's really important for us to get to know our groups, and find intersections and similarities. And just a real quick note about the Latino community. There's pros and cons, right? to using that pan-ethnic term. So when it comes to building political power, we want to say, yes, we have Black Latinos that are involved in the Black Lives Matter movement, and that's going to help your cause, right? And vice versa. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's power in numbers, right? But we're absolutely treated as a monolith. And so even the other day, I was on a call exactly about this topic. And, there's someone who's producing videos, but the videos are all in English. And, Florida is a battleground state. Florida is probably the most important state in this election. And the product was in English, and beyond that, if you want to get very specific and you really truly want to speak to the newly arrived Puerto Rican or Venezuelan, you also have to think about dialect. Right. And, and even generation. And if you're talking about the Cuban population, you have some folks that are conservative if they came in a certain wave, right? Versus folks that come in a different class and a different time. And so just wanted to add that note that it's really important for us to recognize the advantages that we have as being treated as a pan-ethnic, group. But obviously, we need to get to, if we really want to win this election and if we really want to build long-term and move the needle on our issues that impact our communities, we really need to understand the nuances within those groups.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I wanted to add too. I think the theme is that all of our groups have diversity within us. But when we talk about solidarity, we have to understand how systems are operating on us, right? So like in the Black community in the United States, obviously there's diversity too. Black immigrants often get left out or invisibilized in the immigration conversation. And then, there is a diverse range of political beliefs within the Black community, even though, Black people, the statistics say that Black people vote as a block, but that doesn't mean that there is just sort of this uniformity of thought or opinions around what's necessary, right? And I think a part of that manifestation is Black people's historic and present day recognition that, engaging in the political system in a way of solidarity is one thing, but how we operate within our communities is something else, and be able to find that diversity. So it is a tension and it is a push and pull.
Yeah, and so I wanted to bring this up because are there specific techniques that we can point to? Because I think about I even think about the relationships that we make, right? Zoe, as you were talking, I couldn't help but think about when I met you over 20 years ago. You were my first mentee, my first student when I entered the field of education, and your best friend in college, if you remember, yes. Your best friend in college is, one of your still best friends is a Cambodian woman, right? That's right. And the differences between you two were very, very slim. You were like, twins, right? And, part of that experience, I think, was even though you grew up in the Bronx, you and your best friend had a lot of similarities that helped you get through a very tough academic institution. You went to an elite institution, and you and your best friend were able to get through it together, even though you came from two different worlds, so to speak. So, as you were talking about it, I was thinking, this kind of solidarity, I think we often take for granted. I actually wanted to add,
if I may, that exposure is key, right? Because had I never, met someone from Cambodia, I wouldn't have heard that story. And the fact is that her family had to flee Cambodia because they were in the military and they were, the government wanted to kill them, right? And so they had to pretty much cross borders and leave the country, and they were refugees, and mom was pregnant with her, so when you hear those stories, like, oh, wait a second, that's very similar to what's happening at the border here, right? And she was brown skinned, so it's like, oh, you're Asian but you're brown, okay, so is important, right? So we don't, and that's what's in some ways inhibiting the Black-Brown coalition building in at least in Central Florida. I think it's a little different in South Florida and other parts of Florida, because people are not necessarily coming into contact with one another. Geography is such, and the transportation systems are so different than the inner city that you may never really come in contact with with a different community in a significant way. Right. Yeah. And because you're talking about strategies, and I think that exposure is so important.
Yes. So, Zoe, I lived in Central Florida. My first job was community organizing in Polk County.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I feel what you're saying.
I want to. So there's a couple things I have on my mind. I want to first ask Jennė and Howard to talk a little bit about the challenges you both see in voting. But I do want to get back to this idea and the importance of storytelling. And Ben, if you and I have talked about this at length. Right. If you can jump in after that and talk about the importance of storytelling, especially as people are trying to build bridges to get people out to vote. So Howard and Jennė, talk to me about this. Like, what are there strategies? Are there challenges? What can we expect?
So I guess I'll jump in here from the voting perspective. I mean, I think it goes without saying we all know that voting, just as a general matter, is a challenging thing in the context of the pandemic, right? Whether we have fears about going to the polls and what that means if we're in close contact and not socially distancing. But then beyond that, the technicalities of trying to cast a ballot by mail, which in some places has been very easy, where state boards of elections actually go proactively mail them out, and then in other places you have to actually request them. And in some places they're doing everything possible to try to restrict that. So it's kind of that in and of itself is part of the big challenge here. But beyond that, it's just also thinking about the reality of voter suppression, which for those of us who have been here in the States for any period of time and understand the political process, it's sort of a historical feature, right? Definitely true in the history of African-American disenfranchisement over the years, but increasingly true for Latino communities and even for Asian-American communities as well. And so part of it is understanding what the different types of voter suppression are out there that people have to be wary of, whether it's getting kicked off the voter registration ballots, whether it's getting bad information about how to vote or where to vote, whether it's seeing disinformation about candidates, in other words, false information, propaganda, which is an increasingly big problem in social media right now. And it's starting to affect not just the broader population, but specifically targeting Latino communities. There are a lot of challenges out there. And then now more recently, we're starting to see good old-fashioned voter intimidation at early voting locations. This was something that just recently happened in Virginia.
Yeah. Jennė, what do you think?
So I agree with that. I mean, when we talk about voter disenfranchisement, it's all the little subtle things. So I've been a precinct worker in 3 states. I'm including DC as a state because I'm future oriented, right? So North Carolina, Ohio, and in DC. And it's all these little pieces of misinformation. I've been in North Carolina, I was in a precinct and there was a man who had a very thick Spanish accent, but he spoke English fine. And, I watched the precinct workers be disrespectful to him. He had a question about whether he was in the right place. People were so disrespectful to him, giving him the wrong information, treating him like he was stupid, until I intervened. But I also have seen people not knowing what their rights are, not knowing, if they were registered. And I've been given misinformation. When I first voted in Central Florida, I was given misinformation about whether I could vote that day. And if I hadn't known my rights, I wouldn't have voted that day, right? So I think that when you add language access on top of that, it exacerbates everything. So I think there's an opportunity for all of us, regardless of our race or ethnicity, to look out for one another. And when we see people being given misinformation or information not being accessible in their language, or if they have a disability, really speaking up for that and advocating for that. And in my campaign, it's hard because some of these things cost money, right? So I've been talking with folks about how to make our videos accessible, how to translate our information into Spanish into Amharic. And so I would not say that we've been as successful as I like because it is expensive, but we have tried to at least translate our core material in different ways so that people can access it.
Just on that note, there's a lot of great work being done here by Latino Justice. It used to be Pearl Def, Puerto Rican Legal and Education Defense Fund, resembles MALDEF, the Mexican American one. So Latino Justice has been in Florida, I think about 6 or 7 years now. I came right after they opened up their offices and we shared a building space. So, and they do a lot of activism around, ensuring that there's no voter suppression, and they have a hotline that you can actually call, making sure that you can access information in Spanish. So I'll just wanted to put that out there as a resource, Latino Justice for the Latino, and actually they advocate for other communities as well. So they're a great organization. I remember going with my titi to go vote. She had just come from Puerto Rico, and she had her license from Puerto Rico, and they were giving her a hard time. So I had to advocate for her and say, look, it has a signature, it has her picture, and that's what you need. And it wasn't that the poll worker was doing anything intentionally. She just had never seen an ID from Puerto Rico. So I don't really, it was unintended consequences of lack of training. People, there's this huge wave of people coming from Puerto Rico. The poll workers are mostly non-Latino, right? And they're just like, what is this? What's going on? You can't vote. So just wanted to give a shout out to Latino Justice for their work, and of course to Jennė for doing that work, because we need more of our own people out in polls.
Yeah. So now we're going to take a little break, a little intermission with a musical interlude. We have a cuatrista who's going to be performing, Fabiola, and she's a student at the Berklee College of Music. She'll be performing on October 1st at Boston University, and we can't wait to see this talented young artist.
Estoy aquí, salí de mi eterno hogar a caminar. El sol salió, no es igual que en mi hogar. La música me refugiará al otro lado del charco. Aprendí a hacer lo que nunca fui. Y aquí descubrí lo que es sufrir y amar y vivir. Al otro lado del charco aprendí a hacer lo que nunca fui. Y aquí descubrí lo que es sufrir y amar y vivir.
We're doing great, but it feels very rushed. So we'll take our time.
Estoy aquí, salí de mi eterno hogar a caminar. El sol salió, no es igual que en mi hogar. La música me refugiará al otro lado del charco. Aprendí a hacer lo que nunca fui. Y aquí descubrí lo que es sufrir.
That was amazing. I don't know if you guys realize, but this is Bomba Live, the Mujeres edition. Okay, so we love to represent and feature, female guests and artists, and so very excited to see that. I was jamming out in the background. So thank you again, Ben. I just wanted to know what are your thoughts as I guess as we're talking about diversity and coalition building. Asians are often left out of that conversation. So I'm wondering, how do you feel about this conversation? What do you think we could do better to be more inclusive? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Ben, I think you're on mute. But it happens. Listen, a show without someone being on mute is just not a show, right? So, second. Hey, Judy Howard. How's it going?
Hey. Can you hear us okay?
Yep. I feel like we need to combine your names too, like Judy Howard.
So, I wanted to okay. Oh, what's that?
You bet. Yeah. Okay. You're good now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, while we're waiting for Ben, one of the things that I wanted to bring up is that Howard's been writing, a lot of commentary in Puerto Rico about the issues that are happening over there that people don't even realize are happening over here, right? And so, even again, we don't tell enough stories, right? Do you want to just speak about that real quick while Ben gets set up again?
Well, sure. I've been given the opportunity to be an opinion writer for an online newspaper that just started about a year ago now. It's called La Voz Digital. It's based out of Sabana Grande, so it's a West Coast theme, but they cover broader issues. And so one of the things that's been exciting about that from my perspective as someone who's living outside of the island, and I can sort of bring that diasporic perspective to the audience in Puerto Rico who are the primary readers of that. And I think that's a voice that tends to be missed in those conversations within the Puerto Rican community, right? Having that stronger dialogue between people who are living throughout the diaspora and the people who are on the island. And so my goal is to really be able to shed light on also issues here in the States that have an impact on people in Puerto Rico and the Puerto Rican population more broadly. And at the same time, also to be able to communicate what's going on in Puerto Rico to audiences over here who might be interested in learning more about some more specific issues down there.
Right. And I bring that up because I don't think in Puerto Rico, they're not, they may not even be thinking about this cross-racial solidarity that is needed, but then they come and move to places like Florida. They come and move to places where there's a large African-American population or a large Asian population, and they don't know about the histories of cross-racial solidarity, right? And that's why it's so important to have these stories told. Ben, so talk to us about the importance of storytelling.
Absolutely. Can you hear me now? Is this good now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I'm back. Thanks for dealing with my technical difficulties. But yeah, to address your question, Judy and Zoe, I completely agree. Asians are a lot of times left out of coalition building, and I think one of the weaknesses there is exactly what all of you have targeted. I think there's a lack of storytelling, and I think they don't appreciate necessarily the power of storytelling. And the story that you told just in this segment, Zoe, about you and Judy talking about your best friend, your Cambodian best friend, you would have not known about a Southeast Asian type of experience that was very similar, to other Latinx, stories and backgrounds. You would maybe stereotypically we would have assumed that person was maybe Chinese and focused on being a doctor, or their parents were middle class. So, the power of storytelling allows us to empathize. And I think it really connects us and transforms us, moves us into, for lack of a better term, the other person's shoes, and allows us to see our commonalities. And so I think, at least within the Asian population, we need to tell our stories more, and especially in this environment where you have social media, it is more, it's easier than ever to do that. But, I found, especially in my work with Judy, the more you give, the more you tell, right? The more other people will give back to you because they feel connected to you. So
I do want to add that oftentimes systems and folks in power very much intentionally pin us against one another, right? So, you know, we created this table and we're influential. And by making this group diverse, we're going to add one African-American or one Latino. And that limitation, right, that limited representation that is probably not representative of that same ethnic group, but across different class and gender, right? So let's not even go there. Also creates the feeling that there's just that one place at that table and who's going to get it, right? And so if it was occupied by African-American or a Jamaican, or all of a sudden the Latina comes in, people start to feel, right? And I think this is human nature, but also systems are set up this way, right? That scarcity, right? That the idea that there's that scarcity, so that if someone else comes in, you know, a minority comes in, that somehow it's at the, you know, you're compromising something, somebody's losing some kind of influence.
It's zero sum.
Right? At somebody's expense, exactly. And so that happens a lot in places like the South. And so I just wanted to bring that up, because beyond the storytelling and getting to know other groups, you have a very much newly arrived community that's just starting, you know, to what's called, I guess, the browning of America, the browning of Florida, because it's been a black-white dichotomy for a very long time, right? And there's so much work to be done in that space. And you know this, Jennė, you spent time here in Polk County, okay? And so it's just now that, you know, brown faces and folks from other groups are being allowed into those spaces, but it really creates this tension between groups, right? Because of the idea that there's scarcity and that your place at that table might take someone else's place away. So that is a lot in the South, and I think that creates a lot of barriers for coalition building here.
Yeah. So I think, you know, something that we're seeing in this campaign cycle in DC, it's the first year that we've done public financing in DC. So the city will match donations from DC residents 5-1 if you participate, as long as you don't take corporate money or PAC money. And so because of that, it's enabled a lot of people who wouldn't otherwise be viable in the campaign to be able to get in. So in my race alone, there are 24 people running for 2 seats. And it is one of the most diverse, I would say, cohorts of candidates that the city's ever seen. So there are there are 2 Latinos, 2 Latinas. And I apologize to anyone watching from DC if I mess up the count, but it's like a new person joins the race every day, right? There are Asian Americans. There are people whose parents were immigrants. There are immigrants of all races running in this race. And so it's just really beautiful to see the diversity, which means that all of our people, all of our communities really have options, not only in terms of the folks that look like us, but also among other folks to really see how they're able to engage with us about the issues that are relevant to our community. We live all over the city, we're different ages. And so I think that going back to our earlier point around solidarity, when we're looking at, you know, should our local city or state have public financing? Should we change laws to make the political system more accessible? We all need to be on board with something like that because it benefits all of us and gives all of us more options.
Yeah, thank you. So what resources are out there? Basically, we've talked about a lot of different things. We talked about storytelling. We talked about cross-racial solidarity. We talked about what is going on in our community. Where can we find these resources? Ben, you go, and then we're going to go to final word.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think Jennė did a great job talking about now our access to different candidates that may look like us and that may share the same values. And so before we can even get there, right, we need to make sure that we're all registered and ready to vote, right? So I just want to share, you know, that you can't get there without the basics. So, you know, a couple resources I want to share. The first is iwillvote.com. You know, I was on there today just double checking, and you can make sure you're registered. You go there, you pick the state, you pick whether you want to vote in person or in mail, or you need an absentee ballot, whatever you need, and it walks you step by step through to double check and to give you directions, right? Another resource, especially in this, you know, in this time of COVID, I think the statistical polling site 538 does a good job keeping track of the changes that COVID has made on voting and what's new, what's not new, and you can get sort of a across the U.S. View of that. Howard brought up, you know, the insidiousness of misinformation And, there's so much social media and so much information out there. So it's important, to fact check. So you can go to factcheck.org to try to figure out if what people are saying are correct, if you care about facts, that is. But I think we all do. So, that's one important resource. And I have to, you got to give credit where it's due, even though the social media is creating more disinformation. A lot of the platforms these days have, on the top, especially now, it was National Voter Registration Day 2 days ago. And so they're trying to make it easy to get registered and, to be a voter, to make a difference in this next 40 days. So you can do it that way too.
Awesome. So we're wrapping. Thank you for that, Ben. So remember these resources. We want to make sure that people feel empowered now to talk to their neighbors, talk to people who look different from them, and think about the importance of Black, Indigenous, and people of color coming together, especially now more than ever before. What final words do we have, Howard? You and I have talked about this because we're married. We talk about this at home.
Absolutely.
Where are you going with this?
Well, absolutely. I think at the end of the day, what all of us, I think, are trying to say here is that, and to the point of storytelling, our identities shape the way in which we vote, but we don't vote our identities. We vote on what things that we care about. And the more we hear about how our identities are shaped, the more we will realize that we actually have a lot of interests in common, even if our experiences are a little different.
So, what I've been thinking about and talking with folks about this election cycle, and obviously I'm biased because, I'm running, but people need to be discerning with how we vote and vote all the way up and down the ballot, right? So we talk a lot about what's going on with Trump in the presidential race, but all the way down in DC, it's your neighborhood commissioner, it's your school board representative and city council. Make sure you vote every single race and that you're discerning, listening to what people are really saying and thinking about who's truly concerned about building relationships with you and centering your needs and your experiences, I would say, more than just the stats and just the data. Because, we all know our lived experiences. The data can sort of reflect those, but our lives are more complex than the data. So make sure you're being discerning and talking with one another and supporting one another, and definitely go out to vote and fight for it. Call the Board of Elections, go on the website. If you do nothing else, make sure you are crystal clear about what your right is to vote and how to do it.
Yeah.
Yes. Zoe. Okay.
Listen, from Florida, my goodness, we could spend a whole hour talking about what needs to get done in Florida. What I will say long term is that we need to invest in ongoing civic engagement education. And this coalition building doesn't happen overnight, particularly with what's happening with demographics here. So I think that, again, we usually get millions of dollars, 4 weeks before the election, and we're supposed to turn the newly arrived Puerto Rican community out when they're worried about putting food on the table. It doesn't happen that way. I'm sorry. And the media, I get so many phone calls like, oh, can you do a story on the Puerto Rican vote? Send me some money so we can build some infrastructure so people feel connected as a community, so that in 4 years, and I'm getting chills as I say this, 4 years, you can actually call on those people to actually get the vote out, You don't just expect this cold, especially with the various experiences with government, right? And elections. So long term, we have a lot of work to do. In the immediate, I agree, please make sure you register to vote in Florida by October 5th. You should be registered to vote. The other thing, we're speaking to an audience that's probably, a mix of activists and people that are already going to vote. But just in case, in Florida, we have early voting for nearly 2 weeks. It's about 10 days, I believe. So we have early voting. You can request your ballot through the mail. And you can actually take your ballot if you don't feel comfortable, because there's a lot of rhetoric and a lot of misinformation, right? And disinformation around what's happening with the vote by mail. And that's very dangerous, okay? Particularly in the middle of the pandemic. So if people want to request their ballot, they can and they should. There's a deadline that's different for that. And then you can walk it over to an early voting location where most days it's practically empty, okay? So you just go with your mask, take your sanitizer, and you're safe. So just stress that, you got to register, you got to get the vote out short term. But also, we need to educate the community on the various ways, particularly during a pandemic, right? Because there's a lot of fear mongering. So our people are not going to turn out because of what's happening with fear mongering. That's so urgent to me. So thank you for allowing me to extend my final comment there. But I'm in Florida, so it's ground zero. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe. Ben, quick final word, and then we're going to turn it over to the end of our segment with bringing Fabiola Mendez back to play her beautiful music.
Absolutely. So just 2 points. Number one, go vote, and Jennė has my vote. So if you're in DC, make sure you check her name. Number two, let's get to a place and continue to tell stories where we assume we're all on the same side. We're all in this together, right? Fighting the fight. So go vote.
Yes, everybody. My goodness. It's so hard to get this in such a short amount of time. But what I think we did well tonight is that we showed the importance of how important it is that we are sharing in this conversation together. So thank you, Jennė, for taking a stop out of your campaign to talk to us. Thank you, Zoe, for always being so passionate and caring about our community. Thank you, Howard, for taking time out. He had a very long day and does a lot of work writing and doing policy work. So thank you for agreeing to talk about this. And Ben, you were teaching all day. And so I'm really just grateful that you took the time out to be with us. Now we're going to go to Fabiola Mendez. She's from Caguas. And we want to welcome you. So talented. Look at that. And you're holding the cuatro. Oh, so beautiful.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Nice to be here.
And so where are you right now, Fabiola? Are you calling from Puerto Rico or you're calling stateside?
I'm in Boston right now.
You're in Boston, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, and so we know you're performing next week. Talk to us about your journey. What led you to take on this very traditional instrument?
So first of all, for those of you who don't know, this is the cuatro, Puerto Rican cuatro. It's the national instrument of Puerto Rico. And what's really awesome about this instrument is that I believe it carries the history of our culture as Puerto Ricans. In my particular case, I had people both from both sides of my family that were into music or that were bringing culture. And, I was part of many events as I was growing up that involved the folk music of Puerto Rico. So I always saw people playing the cuatro, and I was so drawn into the instrument that I felt the need to learn how to play it, because I didn't see many females doing it. And because of this, that I'm saying that the cuatro, I believe, carries the history of our people. And I'm very proud of being Puerto Rican. So that's a little bit of why I started playing the cuatro, just to represent my island.
And when you were playing, when the video came on, I was jamming and I felt like I was in a jazz club too, right? So tell us more about those influences in your music.
So I moved first of all, I was born and raised in Puerto Rico my whole life. I moved to Boston in 2014 to study at Berklee College of Music, which is an awesome school for music. Mm-hmm. And I had the privilege of being the only person that played this instrument. And also the first person that graduated in 2018. I became the first person to graduate with this instrument, which is such an honor and also a big responsibility. But while at Berklee, I had the opportunity to meet people from all over the world, all styles of music, all different instruments. So I feel like I was able to, como uno dice, como que adquirir y respirar toda esta música. Yeah, like I was around so much that I was able to make it and make the fusion into my music.
Exactly. Entonces tú les enseñaste a ellos en el Berklee College a tocar el cuatro. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, no one knew what the cuatro was, but I always say this. I've been playing cuatro since I was 6 years old. So wow. I knew the mechanics of the instrument. I knew how to play my instrument. Now I needed to go more in depth into music, composition, improvisation. And that is a topic that any musician, like, it doesn't matter what instrument you play. It's a language that we all speak. So I was able to study with guitar teachers, but I also met and studied with saxophone teachers and drummers and percussionists and pianists. So having all this diverse input into my instrument and into my music, it was an honor, and it's what made me play jazz, I guess, with the cuatro.
That's wonderful. And where can people find you? Do you have a website and your social media handles? Where can people?
I do. So my website is FabiolaMendezMusic.com. And you can also find me on Facebook at Fabiola Mendez Music. So yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I hope you will bless us with a live performance.
I will. Yes, of course. So I will play a song that I actually just released yesterday, and it's available on all digital platforms. You can find me as Fabiola Mendez. The song is entitled Reconectar, which translates to reconnect. And it's in Spanish, but I'll translate briefly what I'm talking about. I feel like this time in quarantine, let me rediscover myself and reconnect with many aspects of my life, such as my music, particularly. Like I was able to compose so much more because I had so much more time and energy. I was able to reconnect with nature and just take that time to breathe and to, be myself and be with myself. And I wrote this song as, sort of looking at the positive side. There are many harsh things that have come from this, but there are also some beautiful things that we all have had the opportunity to experience thanks to this time that we've spent quarantined. So this is entitled Reconectar. I hope you enjoy it.
La dicha de poder reconectar con la vida, tierra, música y crecer. Le agradezco al encierro que me ayudó a encontrar mi musa, mi unicornio, el que Silvio no pudo hallar. Pero yo sí me encontré con un pajarito pequeño que mientras iba en busca del sol se topó conmigo y a mi oído cantó esta simple melodía. Agradezco al encierro, silencio y soledad, que entre tanto bullicio no lograba escuchar. Pero yo sí me encontré con un pajarito pequeño que mientras iba en busca del sol se topó conmigo y a mi oído cantó esta simple melodía. Pero yo sí me encontré con un pajarito pequeño que mientras iba en busca del sol se topó conmigo y a mi oído cantó esta simple melodía.
I'm on mute. That was so amazing. Thank you so much, Fabiola.
Thank you.
And you have someone in the background running around there. Who is that?
Yes, that is my puppy, Naima.
Naima, I love it. Well, I'm also a singer, and so any musician who is sharing your heart and your art, I love it. And I'm curious, you mentioned like all of these different folks that you met in Boston and other influences. Can you tell us one or two people who are your influences, either from Puerto Rico or from other places?
So I guess like my top influence is Miguel Zenón, which for those of you who don't know him, he's a jazz saxophone player. He's from Puerto Rico. And he does a lot of fusion with like Puerto Rican traditional music and with jazz. So I really admire him. And he also explores a lot of this different aspects of his identity, which is something that I'm currently working on. in terms of my artistry. And then another one is Silvio Rodriguez, which is a singer-songwriter from Cuba. And in that song that I just sang, I quote a little part because he has a song that's entitled A Unicorn. And he talks about this unicorn that he lost and he was never able to find it. And he's asking everybody, please, if you've seen my unicorn, please let me know where it is. Please get it back to me. And a lot of people have wondered, what is the unicorn? What does that mean? And for me, it's the muse. It's the muse. And in this time, like, I guess I was saying that in the past 2 years, I've been struggling with finding my muse because I was working a day job and I was doing a lot of other stuff that didn't allow me to have as much time to write music.
Yeah.
During quarantine, I was able to find my muse. So in the song that I just sang, I say, I'm grateful to this time in quarantine because I was able to find my muse, my unicorn, the one that Silvio wasn't able to find. So
that's beautiful.
Inspiration for me. Yeah.
Thank you. Also, I'm super impressed at your whistling skills. Like, much respect.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love the whistling as well. And it took me by surprise. As a musician myself, I love the incorporation of the singing, the cuatro playing, and the whistling. And I was wondering, based on what you said, you said you found your muse. Where do you think you see your music evolving to? Not that I want to put it in a specific genre, but we saw the video of you playing, I think, more jazz-esque music. Mm-hmm. This is a little bit different from what the video we saw. And so where do you want it to see it to evolve and move to?
I would classify my music as Latin jazz because I feel like that's a big umbrella. I definitely take a lot of my traditional influences and then I give the cuatro different roles. So what you saw me doing right now, which is playing chord, is not what the cuatro traditionally does. The cuatro is a melodic instrument, usually accompanied by a guitar. The guitar does all the harmony and the cuatro plays the melody. So I'm trying to give the cuatro a different role by playing chords, doing accompaniment, playing a solo, but then going back to the chords, and that sort of thing. So I guess that's where I'm trying to go, sort of show the versatility of the instrument. It's not just for folk music. I mean, yes, it's beautiful and I love to perform my folk music, but I also feel the need to expand what the instrument is able to do, and by playing jazz or other people that do classical music, rock, pop music, Despacito, for example. That's a cuatro.
Yeah.
So, a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah, you can hear it.
So that sort of thing, I feel like a lot of young cuatro players. Yes. Right. Despacito. So I feel the need, and I'm so glad to be part of this generation of young cuatristas that are having this thought. We're young. We want the instrument to evolve with the times. We don't want the instrument to die. So how do we do that? We have to keep it, current with the time.
That was beautiful, and I'm very inspired by your leadership in making sure that tradition doesn't die, like you just said. And as Ray Collazo, thank you for joining us, our producer, director, and founder of Bomba Live. We were both thinking the same thing, that we have a musically inclined group, right? Like, I didn't know Ben was a musician today. I heard when you said you sing. I do not have any of those talents, but I can do dancing. Like, I'll be the one in the back dancing. But Fabiola, that was wonderful. That was beautiful. I think we should have another show where Ben and Jennė, and I don't know if Howard or anybody else has any skills that we don't know about, but it'd be good to have the team back. It looks like we might have.
Fabiola, can you show us the cuatro?
Yes.
Can we see it? Look at that.
Look at that.
This is
So beautiful.
So it's the size is almost like a guitar.
Yeah,
a little smaller than an acoustic guitar. But you can see the shape here. The cuatro was developed by the people in Puerto Rico, by the Jíbaro people, countryside men and women. And this side over here, I always like to say it because they got inspiration from the European string instruments. So they wanted to mimic violins and cellos and wanted to make our instrument as elegant as possible. So that's why you can see the shape here that's similar to a violin.
And it looks like, is it 10 strings, Fabiola?
Yes, it's 5 double strings. Yeah, so 10.
Got it.
Yeah, you can see
Fantastic.
it here.
Did you have any resistance when you were trying to, well, I don't know, it seems like you were the first one to kind of practice this instrument. Did you get any resistance, or was there more like curiosity, from your colleagues and your peers?
While at Berkeley, or you mean in general?
Both.
Both. So I guess in Puerto Rico there are other female cuatro players, not many. There's one that's Maribel Delgado. She's a huge inspiration for me. And at Berkeley, I guess it was different. In Puerto Rico, machismo, a lot of sexism, and I didn't really feel like resistance as much, but I did feel that I always had to work twice as hard. I feel like in every aspect of life, women feel that way.
Yes.
But in my case, I always feel like once I get on stage, I have to show that I can play. Unlike a man that, people say, oh yeah, he's a musician. When they see me, they're like, oh, she's a girl. Okay. And then once I get on stage, I have to be like, I feel like I have to show off or something so that people value me for the musician I am. So that's definitely something that sucks, about the industry right now.
Absolutely. Especially a traditional instrument.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But you modernize it so beautifully, Fabiola. And
Thank
you're at
you.
one of the top music schools in the world. And you're representing our culture, nuestra comunidad, the whole Latinidad, and being a fierce woman, a woman of color, if you will, right? In the United States, you said, strong Latina poderosa, woman of color, change expectations about these beautiful string instruments. And being from Caguas, right, representing an island and really helping to explain the diaspora, right? And the music you play tells such beautiful stories. So, I don't know if you got to catch what we were talking about tonight, but we're all on the show together because we're friends and we really care about this upcoming election, right? We don't want our stories to die, right?
Don't.
And you coming on tonight, what a great way to encapsulate the importance of storytelling. You tell it through a different method, right? And you're telling it, you're holding on to something so sacred that if people don't keep doing it, right, it will go away. We don't want that to happen, right? And so thank you for being a voice of your generation and for continuing the legacy of our community.
Thank you all for providing this space.
Fabiola, so we're gonna close, and thank you for everything and your sharing your talent with us. But we'd love to hear about your virtual concert that's coming up.
Yes, I am on October 1st at 8 p.m. I have the pleasure and the honor of participating in the BU Global Music Festival. So it's produced by the BU Music Department, and I'm super, super excited because we'll be sharing some Puerto Rican music. I'm also going to share the stage with Zaira Pola, an amazing percussionist from Puerto Rico, but based here in Boston as well. We'll play some salsa as well as some Latin jazz. So you can definitely check out that event on BU Arts Initiative. October 1st at 8 p.m. And I'll also share it on my page again, Fabiola Mendez Music on Facebook, FabiolaMendezMusic.com. So you can listen to some awesome and dance with us.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. I'm going to hand it over to you. Judy, if you could give us the final words and thank you again for everyone that came on the show. I co-host with Judy, and today we're missing our third leg, right, of the tripod, which is Dr. D. Denora Nieves. She couldn't join us tonight, but she'll be back for the next one. Judy, please, closing statements, and thank you all again.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Well, I don't want to make this so formal, but I've been thinking about what we shared tonight, right? We each shared a facet of the American story, right? We each shared why it is so important to come together and to learn from one another, right? We learned things about each other tonight that we didn't know. Fabiola came on and created a voice of expression, right? To really kind of capture the beauty of really holding on to your culture and your heritage, but also sharing it with others who didn't know about it, right? And so, there's an importance in storytelling. There's an importance of coming together. Like I said earlier, Jennė's on the campaign trail right now, stopped to hang out with us because she knows how important it is for reaching across the aisle and building bridges. Ben, you're a bridge builder. You talked about the importance of that as well, and how you dedicated your entire career and your life to fighting for other people, right? And what I've learned in my time doing this work is that there's so many types of leadership: quiet leadership, loud leadership. There's interpretive leadership, which is what I think Fabiola showed us tonight. And Zoë, keep fighting for our people, keep fighting for doing good work. Let's all get in good trouble together and get out and vote.
Yes.
In November. Get in good trouble together. May John Lewis rest in peace. But we learn from our ancestors, we learn from our legends and our mentors, and we're just hoping that somebody learned something tonight. So thank you all for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Jennė. Go ahead.
I was just saying, and thank you, Judy. Thank you so much for bringing us all together, because you are, as always, the link that pulls us all together.
I just wanted to give a special shout out because we're talking about good trouble. Okay. So recently, just 2 days ago, I think it was, there was a local school in the heart of a predominantly Latino community here in Orlando, named after a Confederate soldier, Jackson Middle School. So this community fought. There were people in the Puerto Rican Black community that have been fighting to change that school name for probably almost a decade now, Stonewall Jackson. And so finally it was approved by the school board, and the new name is going to be Roberto Clemente Middle School, an Afro-Puerto Rican legend in our community. So shout out to Alianza for Progress, to Misión Boricua, and all these wonderful organizations that really made that push, and the parents at the school board, and of course the first Puerto Rican school board member, Joanna Lopez, right, who also advocated as a member of that school board. So just wanted to give that quick shout out, because good trouble, and it led to some great success in our community, and it's Latino Heritage Month, so why not end with that great note? And thank you again.
Yes. Thank you.
Conozco de un sitio perfecto, mas nadie sabe del lugar. Sirenas cuidan mis secretos, los guardan entre cielo y mar. Refugio contra las tormentas, las penas de la realidad. Solo ella puede comprenderme. Olaya, la reina del mar. Preciosa, ella se aparece, más linda que un atardecer. Sus ojos, dos cielos profundos, su boca, colmena de miel, su cuerpo, precioso y ardiente, me abraza y se vuelve mi piel. Olaya se acerca a decirme lo que siempre he querido saber, pero sonó el despertador y me interrumpe la visita con Olaya. Pero sonó el despertador y me interrumpe la visita con Olaya. Pero sonó el despertador y me interrumpe la visita con Olaya. pero sonó el despertador y me interrumpe la visita como la ya. Pero sonó el despertador y me interrumpe